president of the IMPJ, Israel Movement for Progressive Judaism. Thank you so much for being with us in this moment where we are in the midst of a campaign of Artseinu towards the elections towards the Congress of the Zionist Congress. I also thank Rabbi Uri Lam for being with us and helping with the debate we are going to have with our chat. I also want to thank our team, Joyce, Kelita, Andrea, David. I want to say Rabbi Sergio Bergman, who's the president of World Union for Progressive Judaism, is with us. And also is with us Rabbi Mr. Yair Lutztin, who is the chair of IMPJ. Thank you for being with us. I am proud to inform that Artseinu Argentina has a new president, and the president is also Rabbi Sergio Bergman. So behatzlacha in this new position, and many thanks to Ricardo Hotholz, the previous president, who was also in the presidency of Instituto, and he's still active in both institutions nowadays. Thank you all for being with us here or via Facebook. So this is a meeting in English. We are a few words in Portuguese. Estamos fazendo esse encontro em inglês com os dois convidados. Essa é uma parte de uma programação do Artseinu e da Chapa Israel Plural e Democrática no processo de eleições ao Congresso Sionista. Lembrando que essa é a última semana para haver o registro, e só quem fizer o registro de eleitores é que vai poder depois votar. O registro estará disponível no site que nós vamos colocar no chat abaixo, para que todos possam ter acesso. So let's get started. Well, I will start with Rabbi Gilad Kariv. Well, very often we see a non-partisanship behavior inside liberal congregations, in spite of a religious or liturgic centrality of Israel in our prayers and services. Why Reform Zionism should matter to Brazilian Jews?
So let me start by taking the opportunity to thank you all in Brazil, not only for your kind invitation to take part in this discussion, chat, debate, but mainly for your ongoing efforts on behalf of Artseinu, of our global family, and on behalf of the values and interests of progressive and reform Zionism. I had the wonderful opportunity to visit the Brazilian congregations 2 times as the president of the IMPJ in recent years. In one of the trips, I was also invited to see a football match in the Premier League in Brazil. This is the first time I saw a football match from the cabin of the presidents of the teams, and it's a wonderful experience, but it was much more impressive to visit your institutions and your congregations. And I look forward to meet you in person, both in Brazil and in Israel. Look, I would like to suggest that when we are talking about Reform Judaism, we need to start from the beginning and to remember that our basic commitment is not for the state of Israel per se, or to the values of the Zionist movement. Our core commitment is to the idea of Jewish continuity, and to make sure that the Jewish people continues to contribute to mankind and to carry the old legacy in a way that is relevant to our generation and to the generation to come. If we share this basic commitment for the well-being of the Jewish people and for the future of Jewish people, we need as progressive, liberal, and reform Jews to identify that in the end, the well-being of the Jewish people in modern era is based mainly on two great movements. The first is the Zionist movement that created a strong center of Jewish, sovereign Jewish life in our ancient homeland. And the second movement is the movement that we all belonged to, the movement that brought the idea that not only we are allowed to renew our ancient traditions, we are forced to renew them if we want them to keep alive and relevant. And if you are willing to embrace this understanding, I will suggest that all Jews that live outside Israel should care about the future of the state of Israel as a center of Jewish life. And all the Israelis should care about the well-being of Jewish life outside Israel. For me, a Jewish person around the world that is not holding a Zionist view declares that he is not deeply interested in the future of Judaism and the Jewish people. And at the same time, or in the same way, or in the same manner, an Israeli Jew that declares that he doesn't care about Jewish life outside Israel also neglects his basic duty to secure the future of the Jewish people. So we should care about progressive and reform Zionism because this is one of the most important tools, not the only tool, but one of the most important tools we have in order to make sure that Judaism survives and that the Jewish people plays a glorious role in the future of mankind.
Thank you, Rabbi Gilad. Rabbi Leah, the same question.
Thank you. I'm as a German national, I think in Brazil I'm not really allowed to mention football. I remember a match that probably no Brazilian wants to remember. Unfortunately, I've never had the pleasure to visit Brazil, but I look forward to the opportunity, and I am very, very grateful to the wonderful team, Daniel, that you managed to assemble in Brazil and all the wonderful work that you're doing on our behalf. I think everyone has been looking with great jealousy at the richness of the programs that you've been providing in the past few weeks and has really seen how hard you're working. And I think that in and of itself is a great celebration. And I'm really proud and just ashamed that I don't know enough Portuguese to be able to enjoy all of these wonderful programs. I think just to add to what Gilad was talking about, I think there is an additional reason why, even if we don't consider it a partisan question, a question around what do we think about the policies of the State of Israel, I think as progressive, reform, liberal Jews, it is absolutely central that we care about how progressive Judaism is treated in the State of Israel, because it will be a losing battle for us around the entire world if we can continue to tolerate that our type of Judaism is treated as second class in the Jewish state. We cannot demand respect for our way of being Jewish around the world if the State of Israel does not even guarantee that right to us. So I think the question around what are the rights of progressive rabbis in the State of Israel, what are the rights of congregations, is absolutely central to any progressive Jew around the world. So I think it's not just a battle for Israel, it's a battle for our way of being Jewish. It's nothing partisan. It has nothing to do with which party is currently in government. It has to do with the issues that we care deeply about. It has to do with our belief that our way of being Jewish is just as valid and justified as another expression of being Jewish, and we want to be recognized as that. And if the state of Israel doesn't recognize that, then we still have some way to go. Doesn't mean we should give up, doesn't mean we should be frustrated and say, you know, we'll just forget about it and we'll try to fix it elsewhere. I think quite the opposite. It means we need to be stronger. We need to strengthen our congregations. There's a political battle, but there's also the very simple thing of opening people's minds, all our relatives and friends in Israel. And I'm sure many of the people who are listening right now have friends and relatives in Israel who probably never stepped foot into a progressive synagogue, who might have been in a progressive synagogue abroad, but never in Israel. We need to do that work of encouraging people to get to know our wonderful movement in Israel, and we need to do our bit from outside Israel to support them.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi Lea Mühlstein. And I have another question for you. How can we collaborate with the Jewish state as Brazilian Reformed Zionist Jews? And is Aliyah the only true Zionist commitment to a diaspora Jew?
So I think Aliyah is an important Zionist commitment. I say this as somebody who didn't choose to make Aliyah. But I do think it is important. In the end, it is Israelis who vote for the Knesset. So if we do want to have the full ability to express our democratic rights, then citizenship is definitely one answer. I don't think it's the only answer, though. I think actually if we look at it objectively speaking, oftentimes we can actually achieve a lot more in changing Israeli politicians' minds about progressive Judaism outside of Israel than we can in Israel. In Israel, it's easy to ignore it, but for example, the Israeli ambassadors abroad, when they're invited to progressive synagogues, it's much harder for them to say no to us because we're just another synagogue. So they come, and many of them will experience for the very first time what progressive Judaism looks like. Many ambassadors or embassy staff or even Israeli politicians that come and visit will meet their first woman rabbi overseas. So I think what can you do as Brazilians that is not Aliyah is build relationships with Israeli representatives. Encourage Israelis to come into your congregation while they're traveling through Brazil. Even, you know, you never know. You might just catch one backpacker, although nowadays that's maybe not so much happening anymore. But many Israelis discovered Judaism abroad. So welcome everyone in with an open heart and get engaged through the work of Artzeinu, where you can get a democratic say. And I think we're coming back to that, so I'm not going to say much more on this now. But I think there are many ways in which we can strengthen Israel and strengthen our way of being Zionists that doesn't just involve Aliyah.
Thank you. Rabbi Gilad Kariv, can you speak about the development of Israeli Reform Judaism in the last 20 years? Maybe you can address something not only by the IMPJ, but also about Iraq.
So first of all, I'm glad that we have in this discussion the chair of Artzeinu, my good friend Rabbi Leah, and also the president of the World Union, Rabbi Sergio Bergman, because I think that when we're talking about the development of progressive and reform Judaism in Israel, we cannot ignore the tremendous contribution of those two institutions to the growth of our movement in Israel. I think that without the desire of the World Union, the historic desire of the World Union to seed progressive and reform Judaism in the Jewish state. And without the political involvement of Artseinu in the national institutions, Reform Judaism would have stayed a marginal force in the Israeli society. And I'm glad to say that in the last 2 decades, we see a rapid growth in the work of our movement in Israel, in the presence of our rabbis, congregations, and institutions, and a growing impact of our social and public advocacy and legal work on the Israeli discourse. And in order to understand this rapid growth that has also to do with the emerging new generation of Israeli-born lay leaders in our movement, and my friend and partner Yair Lutstein, the chair of the IMPJ board, who is with us, is a wonderful example of this new generation of lay leaders. In order to share with you what is happening today in Israel, I will present a few numbers. And I'll start by sharing with you that in the last 10 years, we succeeded to double the number, or more than double, the number of Israeli Reform congregations across the country. And if till 15 or 20 years ago, this idea that we will have at least one strong, well-established, egalitarian, inclusive, progressive Jewish congregation in each one of the Israeli cities, if 15 years ago it was only a dream, we are moving towards realizing this vision that all non-Orthodox Israelis, secular Israelis, traditional Israelis will have this basic accessibility to what we offer as egalitarian and inclusive congregations. We more than doubled the number of Reform rabbis in Israel. Most of them were born in Israel. Most of them were ordained in Israel in the HUC campus in the center of Jerusalem. And those rabbis are working hard in order to lead our congregations, but we have today Reform rabbis that are working outside the Israeli movement and creating a massive impact in other arenas of the Israeli society. According to the last studies we conducted, we have today more than 800,000 Israelis that see our congregations and institutions as their default synagogue, the synagogue that they will go in order to celebrate a bar or bat mitzvah, in order to have a meaningful Jewish wedding, even though our rabbis are not recognized for the sake of conducting official marriage ceremonies in Israel. And this audience is growing every year. Now, Daniel, you also mentioned the wonderful work of our legal and advocacy arm, the Israel Religious Action Center. And it's important to remind us all that at the same time, this important arm of our movement is fighting for our rights and our interests. And IRAC is one of the leading Israeli civil rights organizations that is working in this important area of freedom of religion and conscience. And many of the breakthroughs that were created in Israel in this complicated arena of state and synagogue relations were created by the legal and the public work of IRAC. But at the same time, and it's important to remember it, IRAC is working on behalf of all of us in Israel and around the Jewish world, not only in order to promote our interests, but also in order to promote our values. And IRAC is working hard in order to promote equality to all segments of the Israeli society. IRAC is the leading legal organization who is working with the LGBTQ community and institutions in order to make sure that the legal status of same-sex families in Israel is protected. Iraq is leading today the most successful campaign against racism in Israel, and a campaign for civil equality for minorities. Iraq is deeply involved in issues of immigration policy, the rights of New Orleans, making sure that the law of return, Chok HaShvut, will not be interpreted on a narrow base of an orthodox approach towards the question of who is a Jew. And I think that we can all be proud in the fact that while we are struggling to secure our legitimacy in Israel and our equal status, we invest many resources, many efforts in order to fight together with other Israeli communities in order to fully implement the values that were presented in Israel's Declaration of Independence. And among them, of course, is the idea of civic equality as a Jewish value, and not only as a democratic value.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi Gilad, you talked about the LGBT issue into the Reform Jewish congregations in Israel. How can Reform Judaism in general in Israel deal with this issue, and also with interfaith dialogue, and also with annexation? That's a very actual issue now. And about Shelot Kashot. And what are the challenges now? I'm talking to our colleagues with Rabbi Or Zohar, for example, and I'm trying to understand what are the challenges now for Reform community in Israel during the pandemic. I'm also asked to Rabbi Lea Mühlstein also about how is it with LGBT interfaith issues outside of Israel. So Gilad first, thank you.
So first I need to say toda, thank you for not asking me to present the progressive solution to the pandemic. We don't have yet, our scientists didn't come with a reform and a progressive answer to the pandemic. And yes, you raised some massive questions. First, when it comes to the LGBTQ community, I think that we can all celebrate the fact that we are part of a global Jewish family that for many years now is holding an inclusive approach and an egalitarian policy towards members of the LGBTQ community as individuals and also as families. And in that regard, I believe that the challenges and the opportunities that Israeli congregations face in this arena are basically similar to the challenges and opportunities that many World Union congregations around the world face. Still, I would like to suggest that in Israel, our effort carries a unique character. Because in Israel, by definition, once this is a sovereign state with a Jewish majority, a state in which the public discourse is deeply connected to Jewish narratives, to Jewish stories, to Jewish traditions, to the way we Jews describe the world, because this is a Jewish and a democratic state, when you are caught in a public debate, when you are trying to promote progressive policies in Israel, you need to find a way to root them also in a Jewish context. Now, this is something that we all experience when we are talking about our internal communal discourse. But in Israel, this is not only an internal communal discourse, this is also the sovereign, the political, the legal discourse of the country. And as the leading progressive Jewish force in Israel, we carry the duty to remind Israelis that the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox understandings of Judaism are not the only legitimate and relevant options. And that this dichotomy that was created by the Orthodox monopoly, but we need to be honest enough in order to admit that it was fully supported by some of the secular political and cultural forces in Israel. This dichotomy between orthodoxy and secularism, and this approach that there is basically nothing in between, this is something that we need to turn over in the minds and in the hearts of many Israelis. And that is why, at the same time, our attorneys, IRAC's attorneys, are representing the LGBTQ organizations in Jerusalem in front of the local court. And at the same time, our rabbis are officiating in marriage ceremonies, are conducting bar and bat mitzvah services to the children of same-sex couples, are writing about those issues and are promoting our inclusive understanding of Judaism. And one of our main achievements in Israel is that today we are starting to have moderate, modern Orthodox partners in presenting this approach. And this is definitely a huge achievement of the LGBTQ community and an achievement of the progressive communities in Israel. When we're talking about the interfaith challenge, here again, most of our progressive, liberal, and reform and reconstructionist congregations around the world, all the communities in the World Union Global Network, all of us are engaged in interfaith work. But at the same time, we need to remember that there is only one place in the world in which Jews are addressing the task of interfaith dialogue from the perspective of the majority, and not from the perspective of a minority group. And I'm sure that you can understand the difference that exists in a very natural way when you're not coming as a minority group to the table, but rather as a majority group. The duties you are carrying as a majority are much more heavy than the duties that you are carrying as a minority group. And here again, I think that we are the ones that are working day and night in order to present Israeli Jews the idea that the value of the state of Israel as a Jewish state, again, not only as a democratic state, will not be set only by the size of the Jewish majority, but also in a very deep manner by the way that this Jewish majority creates an equal room for the minority groups in Israel. And that is why a few years ago, at the same time, we launched with the Israel Religious Action Center a new legal and advocacy center to fight expressions of Judaism and policies of discrimination. And at the same time, why we offered our congregations to start programs that will bring together their congregants with Israeli Arab families. And unfortunately, in Israel today, the vast majority of Jewish citizens and the vast majority of non-Jewish citizens don't get to work together, definitely not to send their kids to the same school. And we need to build those bridges between the communities. And this is part of our Zionist philosophy. Now, in regard to the annexation challenge, and then I will turn it to my colleague and partner. Here it's important to say that there is an important difference between the Israeli movement and many of the progressive and reform movements around the world. Till today, our movement, the Israeli movement, held the position that we should not adopt a formal position towards the issue of the occupied territories and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And this is a big difference from many of our sister movements around the world that adopted in a very clear manner a position that supports the two-state solution. And the reason why we didn't do it is because we are still fully engaged in presenting this basic idea of inclusive and egalitarian Judaism to wide segments of the Israeli Jewish community. And we thought that if we take a formal stand on this very strong debate inside the Israeli society, it will narrow the entrance doors of our synagogues and institutions. I think that the issue of annexation, not as a general topic, but if it will be implemented in a way that doesn't protect the core democratic values of Israel, for example, implementing the sovereignty of Israel on territories in which there are Palestinian residences that will not gain full Israeli citizenship, and this is only an example. If the issue of annexation will push back the core democratic values of the state of Israel, I believe that we will have to consider in a very serious manner adopting for the first time as an Israeli movement a position in regard to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But I need to say that I'm not so sure that we are there. It looks like the issue of annexation is put aside a little bit because of the pandemic, but we are fully alerted to the possibility that this development might force us to reconsider our position in this very complicated ideological and political territory.
Thank you. I think Rabbi Kariv already shared with us in great detail, I think, answers to the question just raised. So I want to try to be maybe a little bit more general in the sense of addressing a little bit how can we as a political organization, Artseinu is the political voice of Reform, Progressive and Liberal Religious Zionists. We're not a congregational movement. That is the role of the World Union for Progressive Judaism around the world. We are, by definition, a political movement, yet our affiliation comes primarily through people's religious affiliation, which means it's quite difficult actually for us to say, are we left-wing or are we right-wing? In some countries, it's very clear that the vast majority of progressive Jews are more left-wing, and probably on the whole progressive Jews are more left-wing, but there is a very strong constituent that we have which is quite centrist in terms of when it comes to Israeli politics, and we do have people who feel comfortable in our congregations who have right-wing views. And so the challenge for us is how can we take political positions, taking that into account without alienating some of our very important constituents. And I think for me, the guiding force of that has always been to say, we need to be true to our values. When it is about our Jewish values, and I think there is actually a global understanding amongst progressive Jewry about where our values stand. When it comes to our values, if there is a political position that goes against those values, then we should take a very strong stance. That might be around LGBT issues, it might be around interfaith. It certainly was the case around the question of the rights of asylum seekers in Israel, where also the Israeli Reform Movement took a strong stance, supported through our work also in the national institutions. And I think I want to maybe try and take it back a step so that our listeners can get a better sense of why does this matter? Why should we vote for the World Zionist Congress elections? What is even this thing, and how is this relevant to our discussion? Well, still over 120 years after Herzl, the Zionist Congress does convene, though in this time round it is likely to convene virtually for the first time in history due to the pandemic. Nonetheless, it convenes as the voice of world Jewry, as the political voice of world Jewry. And as part of that, world Jewry gets a vote. Israelis get a vote too for the World Zionist Congress. They don't know it. It's through the Knesset elections. Most Israelis have no idea that they're also voting in the Knesset elections for the party that will represent them in the World Zionist Congress. Around the world, we get a voice by voting in elections for the World Zionist Congress, and you can register at the moment in Brazil for those elections, and do please consider supporting Artzenu Brazil's list, which is a list together with Merkaz as well. And it does really matter because it is the only formal political space for world Jewry to express their opinion, where we sit as equals at the table. We do not have a political party just for Reform Jews in Israel that runs for the Knesset. So unlike Sephardi Jews who have Shas in the Knesset, we do not have a Shas equivalent in the Knesset. And at the moment, I think we all agree that that's probably the best way as well. But we do have a political party, it's Artzenu. And as Artzenu, we get an equal seat and an equal voice according to our strength in the election. So the more votes we get, the more powerful our voice is around the table. And on many of the issues that we are discussing, the voice of world Jewry is actually heard. In the debate around the treatment of asylum seekers, the fact that the Jewish Agency passed a resolution, almost actually unanimously, I think, in the end, that said, that criticized the government of the State of Israel for its decision on how to treat African asylum seekers, was one of the important things that changed how the government policy was enacted, and that government policy was retracted. If we think about the issue around the Kotel and women of the wall, and whether women are allowed to wear talit at the Kotel, for many years, women of the wall and the progressive movement fought in front of the court for their rights, and made some progress, but it didn't really create a shift on the ground. When and this has nothing to do with me, but when Artzenu, World Union, and IMPJ leadership understood that we need to use our political power that we have around the table, we started to make real progress. We started to shift the conversation. We started to be powerful partners that you couldn't ignore. We started to be the people that you needed to make compromises with. It doesn't mean we win everything immediately, but the stronger we are, the stronger our bargaining position is. And the more we can fight for the values that we believe in. And I believe the only way we can do that is by fighting together. It's absolutely instrumental that we work together. It's one of our great strengths that we've had in the past years, is that we have worked in true partnership, that between the World Union, Artseinu, and the IMPJ, we work in partnership in those institutions to maximize what the benefits for our movement. And the more voice, the stronger voice we have, the more votes we get, the better we can do that.
Thank you, Leah. I want to, for the record, former Artseinu President Nelson Cooperman says hello to you. Gianni, his wife, also. It seems until today, Leah, we suffer the consequences of a late reconciliation between Reform Judaism and Zionism. And so it's in a historical background. And then I move on to Miriam Wasserman question. Miriam says hello to you too, to you and Gilad. Her question is, most congregants of our congregation doesn't know about the World Zionist Congress. With this election in Brazil, after 30 years, it's very difficult to get people involved, even with the big effort being done. In your opinion, what could be done in the future to make a change in this situation? And then I think you already answered something related to the reality, but tell us a little bit about the future aspects.
So I really am a passionate Zionist. Some of my colleagues, I think, sometimes get a little bit annoyed that I am such a passionate Zionist. Historically, I absolutely understand the disconnect between progressive Judaism and Zionism, because in many ways they were two responses to modernity that were trying to kind of fix two sides of the same problem. And that made sense in the beginning, right? It made sense in a sense to separate forces. But I think what we can say for certain is both progressive Judaism and Israel is around to stay. And I think what we need to recognize that is that actually we cannot really be Jews if we don't feel a connection to the land. I think it's a complete misreading of our Jewish tradition to claim that we do not have a connection to a land, that Judaism isn't about the experiment of Jewish sovereignty. And as progressive Jews who are invested in bettering the world in Tikkun Olam, we can't be bystanders in the most incredible experiment of what does it mean for Jews to actually have power, to not just be a minority that has to sort of navigate an external world, but to both enjoy the advantages and deal with the challenges that come with power. Power is not something that comes lightly. Power also means that you become the perpetrator of things that maybe you're not too proud of. We see that everywhere, but I believe we can't be bystanders in this. And I think one of the things we need to become more confident, and this is in many ways a plea to my colleagues, is rabbis and congregations should no longer be afraid of talking about Israel in the congregations. I'm still saddened that a very large number of my colleagues think that they cannot preach about Israel, because they always see only politics about Israel. But there are many things about Israel that don't have to be about the most controversial of issues, or that can be addressed in ways that can connect all of us. Because we might have different views, even as progressive Jews, about sovereignty of the Jordan Valley and whether Israel should extend sovereignty to the Jordan Valley or not, and whether that's pragmatic politics or not, or whether we think that Hebron should always be a Jewish city or should have a Jewish presence. We might have differences on that, but that doesn't mean we can't talk about it. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't relate to it. And it most importantly doesn't mean we should forget about all of the other things that Israel has to offer. So I think in many ways, what can we change for the future? I think we need to be closer linked. I think the Domim project, which the IMPJ runs, which is a twinning project between Israeli Reform congregations and Reform congregations abroad, is a beautiful project because there is so much that we can be enriched by Israel. The new prayer book that the Israeli Reform movement is publishing, those should be things that excite us, that we want to bring into our congregations. We want to encourage our congregants not just to go for a nice holiday in Israel, but to spend Shabbat with our communities there and to bring back the wonderful tunes that inspire them. And I think while the pandemic has been really tough on all of us with many, the human cost of many lives lost, I know in Brazil it's a very bad situation. In the UK, sadly, the situation isn't all that much better. And the Jewish community, for example, has been over proportionally affected by the deaths from COVID-19 in the UK. The one beautiful thing about it is it's brought everyone online. I can now, before I go to lead Shabbat services for my congregation, I can spend Shabbat, Kabbalat Shabbat with 3 congregations of the IMPJ first. So I encourage us to do more of that, to do things like, if our services are already on Zoom, let's do one together, a congregation in Brazil together with a congregation in Israel, because I think the way we understand relevance and the way it'll change for the future is if we get to know each other, if we build relationships with each other, if we get excited by the creativity that Israel has to offer, rather than always being depressed by the politics that maybe are, I'm sure for the Israelis actually much worse than for us diaspora Jews. And on that note, I think I'm going to hand over to Rabbi Kariv.
Thank you, Rabbi Lea Mühlstein. I was prepared to make a question about the partnerships between Israeli and Brazilian Reform congregations, and you told us about Domim, that it's a so beautiful project that I saw it when it was born, and I think that we could return to Domim project, to the Israel Diaspora Day. So I asked to Rabbi Gilad Kariv, what kind of partnerships could be built between Israeli and Brazilian Reform congregations? And after that, I would like to address the word to our colleague, Rabbi Sergio Bergman. There's a reference for us in our Latin America, and I am so glad that he's now our president of WPJ. Gilad?
Yes. So first of all, as Uri, from your personal biography, the best way to build bridges is to make sure that Brazilian progressive Jews feel totally comfortable to spend few years in Israel, and that Israeli Reform rabbis feel totally comfortable in serving congregations outside Israel. And today, if I recall correctly, 2 Brazilian congregations are led by Reform rabbis that spent significant time in Israel, the congregation in São Paulo, and you yourself, Uri. And in the end, the most important bridges are the personal bridges. And to make sure that we cultivate joint experiences among our leaders, among our rabbis, among our professionals. And that part of our leadership DNA is to recognize the fact that yes, we are part of a local congregation, yes, we are part of a national movement, but at the same time, we are part of a global family, a global Jewish progressive and reform and liberal family. Now, as Leah and you mentioned, it's time for all of us to understand that we need to invest energy, time, wisdom, and money in building the relations and cultivating them. And in that regard, we truly need to embrace the understanding that 73 years after the State of Israel was born, and that 78 or 75 years after the Second World War ended, and even 30 years after the Eastern Bloc collapsed and Soviet Jewry was able to free itself, we need to embrace the understanding that the younger generation of Jews in general and progressive Jews in particular don't carry the memories of those great moments of Jewish history from the 20th century. And if for our grandparents and for our parents, this sense of one people was a very direct and natural outcome of those dramatic, tragic, and joyful moments, Jewish moments of the 20th century, if we understand that the younger generation is not carrying this natural belonging, it must lead us to the understanding we need to invest more energy and more efforts in years to come in order to build the efficient programs that will enable us to build those bridges. We need to make sure that each one of the Brazilian progressive congregations is twinned with one of the Israeli congregations, and maybe also with a congregation from another part of the Jewish world. We need to make sure that young Brazilian Jews feel totally welcomed by our communities and our movement in Israel to come, if it's through the Shnat of Netzer and the World Union or through other programs, to experience life in Israel. We need to make sure that once the flights are renewed, we make sure that we come and visit each other. And till then, as Rabbi Leah said, we need to use all the web techniques in order to make sure that we maintain the dialogue and we even develop it. And I think that it's time for us to understand that we can't wait till our Israeli movement and the other movements around the world are well established in order to develop this dialogue. An essential part of us becoming stronger in Israel is to have a vibrant dialogue with reform and progressive congregations overseas and the other way around. An important element of the strength and resilience of the progressive communities in Brazil must be the ties of the Brazilian communities with the State of Israel and with our reform movement. Now, in order to tie it to the Zionist elections, we really need to understand that much of the work of the IMPJ and much of the work of the World Union for Progressive Judaism and much of the work of Artseinu is based on our political strength in the national institutions. There is a direct link between the results of the Zionist elections in Argentina and Brazil and the ability of the Israeli communities and the world communities to work together and to create those bridges. And without a major presence in the World Zionist Organization, in the Keren Kayemet L'Israel, the Jewish National Fund, in the Jewish Agency, in Keren HaYesod, if we are not there around the table in a very impressive and massive way, our ability to secure the future of our communities in Israel, but also outside Israel, will be much more complicated and weak. And like in politics, we need to win in order to impact the our situation and the situation around us.
Thank you, Rabbi Bergman. And after Rabbi Bergman, I will ask for the final words of Rabbi Lea and Gilad.
Only to say that it's so important to connect each with other, and here with the leadership of Lea Nortzeinu Olami and Gilad with the Israel movement together with Yair. This is a really and true way to build liberal Zionists. That means that it's not a declamation, that it's really concrete work what we are doing on the field. And right now, the challenge is today, we are finalizing our process here in Argentina, and we are encouraging you and supporting all the Brazilian friends that we need to be involved. This is very important to take part of that. That is, we are not only praying for Israel, we are working with Israel, we are part of Israel, and this is so important to raise our voice. There are long years that we have not elections in our local federation. And the only way to have a voice is to be part, to convince the traditional Zionist parties that the reform movement have very strong voices around the world, ideological, but also on the field, building communities, building Jewish life, and addressing to the future and the continuity of the Jewish people in this unique approach that is progressive, liberal Jews. And thank you, all of you in Brazil, to doing that and to succeed. I really supportive of all the work that we are doing here in Latin America, and go ahead, because with Brazil we will get really a new voice and a lot of mandate to the next World Congress.
Thank you, Rabbi Bergman. Thank you for your words. Rabbi Lea?
Thank you. I just want to close really by saying a big thank you to you, Daniel, and Rabbi Lam, and everyone else who's been so active putting this call together and doing all the other work on the ground. And to all those listening, we can't do it without you. We only have, those of us who are in leadership roles, only have the power that you hand us. We only have as much strength as the number of people that show up for us. So one of the most important things that you can do, actually probably the most important Jewish thing you can do right now, is sign up, make sure that you are eligible to vote. Visit the Artzeinu Brazil Facebook page for all the details of how you can sign up to register for the Congress. Make sure you vote. Once you've done that yourself, make sure you find at least 10 friends who will do the same. We can all be leaders. We are all leaders by bringing people along who we lead. You can be a leader, every one of you, and together you will give us strength to be able to ensure that progressive Judaism thrives in Israel, but also thrives around the world, because I think, I hope we were able to show that the two are connected. It's not just like we're working for Israel and that's just for someone else. That's also for us. So thank you very much to all of you, and please make sure to vote. Gilad.
Thank you.
So, dear friends, I'm not so sure you planned it in advance, but today is the Yortzeit of Theodor Herzl, Kaf B'Tammuz. And when you are reading Herzl's writings, both his programmatic book, Medinat HaYehudim, the State of the Jews, and also his novel, Alte Neuland, the Old New Land, you cannot escape the understanding that Theodor Herzl was a progressive Zionist. And when you look into Herzl's biography, you get to understand that he was raised by a progressive Hungarian Jewish family that belonged to the neological movement and not to the Orthodox movement. And there is a deep connection between the Jewish upbringing of Theodor Herzl and the way he envisioned the Jewish state. Now, there are mighty forces today in Israel and around the world that are trying to suggest that we are not authentic Jews and we are not authentic Zionists. And that true Judaism and true Zionism belong to what I call the messianic forces of modern Jewry. And we need to remind the others, but first to remind ourselves that we are the defenders of the authentic Zionist values and ideas, that the Jewish people can renew its days and can build a strong and a vibrant sovereignty that embraces the more progressive Jewish values of our tradition. Now, unfortunately, too many times we, progressive and reformed Jews, are embracing what the others have to say about us. But when we go and we check the numbers, and when we go and we check the actual results, we are reminded by our strength. And today, a few hours ago, we received the results of the affiliation to the Zionist Federation in Australia. Artseinu Australia by far are the leading and the largest Zionist force in the Australian Jewish community. In the US, by far, we are the largest Artseinu party in the American Zionist movement. This is the case also in Canada. And we need to remember that in the end, we have the ability, because of our leaders, because of our values, because of our institutions, to be the leading Zionist force in the coming Zionist Congress and in years to come. And I think that with this approach, we need to address the Israeli challenges of our movement and also the challenges of our communities overseas. And I'm adding my deep gratitude to each and every one of you, the lay leaders, the rabbis, the professionals, for your courageous effort to make sure that the Zionist voice of the Jewish community in Brazil will be in the end the voice that was presented by Theodor Herzl more than 120 years ago. So friends, toda to all of you. We all admire you here in Israel.
Thank you, Rabbi Gilad. Special thanks to Dekel Humash, who's here with us, with whom we interact a lot and who help us a lot in Artseinu issues, just as Rabbi Lea. And thank you also to David Bernstein, who's a deputy. I forgot your position, David, but he is very active in the IMPJ, and he has helped us to schedule this meeting with Rabbi Gilad Kariv and Rabbi Lea Mühlstein. Thank you all for being with us. And Rabbi Yuri Lam, thank you for sharing this this coordination with us. And thank you, rabbis, for sharing your views on liberal Zionism.
Thank you.
Thank you.